Hi, welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Johan, for these of you who do not know by now. And today we will be continuing our series where we actually develop a Flutter app. This is the second episode. For those of you who might have missed, we have a link below to the first episode where we actually set up the project and discuss the file structure that we will be using. So feel free to go and watch that one if you haven't seen it already. You should be fine to follow along with this one if you want to watch that one afterwards. Um, so yeah, that's that. Also, just within that video, we had a few prerequisites. We will be using Visual Studio Code. So just if you want to follow along, just use that. You do require the Flutter SDK to be installed. And also the Flutter extension for Visual Studio Code. So yeah, I think it's we're on the exact same place we left off on our last stream. So yeah, let's quickly discuss what we will be doing in this one. So today's topic will be about connecting our app to the API. We will be doing a couple of things. We will be creating our first view. So we'll have a page that we will be displaying actual data on. We'll also actually create a root generator. So we'll have a class that has a bunch of sorry, a cat decided to join the stream. So we'll actually have a generator that has references to our views within it, and also how we structure that generator so it's much easier for us to pass data between pages and also reference a new page within our app. Yeah, so that's the root generator. The API I've mentioned. We'll import an HTTP package. We'll build our API connection. We'll also show you how the block works. So we'll be streaming data to the front to the app's visual side, and we'll also have a repository where we actually call the data from, and you'll get a practical example of our file structure that we discussed last week. So yeah, I think it's a good idea for us to start. Just we're on exactly the same spot we left off 2 weeks ago. As you can see, I actually have the app running now with our localization and environment in it. So just if you can remember, there was a build issue during that development. I completely forgot to add within our main app off just before the innet, just to call this now. So pretty much what this does, it lets Flutter or lets the app wait for all its innets to complete before building the screen. So pretty much what this does, it extends your splash screen with a few milliseconds for each one of these functions to complete, and then it runs your app. So yeah, I forgot that. That's why we couldn't get any data or the app actually build. So yeah, I think we can start. So I think the first thing that we should do is we should actually get rid of our sample view. We won't be needing it. I mean, we've used it for an example. We only need the folder that it is in, so we can delete that. And then, so I'm just going to copy the sample features so we get the file structure and everything that's within it. We don't need to use that each and every time. So that's normally why in most of my projects I will have an empty folder called sample structure, just so it's an easy reference to create a copy of it. So I'm going to paste that in and then rename this folder to home. So you might have guessed that this is going to be our home feature structure. Within it, it's going to be the initial page we see when we load up the app. It's going to be the block that's initially loaded with this view, and it's also going to have the repository we'll use. So those are all stuff we'll add today. It's also going to use the widgets folder, but that's going to be next time's video where we actually do some UI styling and stuff like that. So yeah, let's first create our home view page, just so we have something to work from. I'll call it home view. I'll import my material widgets. I'll create a stateful widget, and let's call it home view. So yeah, this is going to be the first thing that our first page within the app. It'll make more sense now when I actually set up the router, and then you'll actually see how this will be displayed. So just for visual, it's not necessary, but I'm just going to add a scaffold, so we actually get like a white screen when we actually load up the routing. So yeah, let's add the router. So within our material app, there is an option. As you can see, it's commented out. This does come with the actual the Flutter generator. So if you generate a new project, you will get this as standard. So you're more than welcome to use it as they are using it. However, I have found that if your app has, even this is a bit much. Let's say if your app has more than 5 screens, this can get a bit bloated, and to have this all in one view or in one page, yeah, it could get a bit messy. So I prefer to pull it out into its own page and its own class, and then I've also I've reworked the actual way it uses to call the classes, the views within it, and we will do that now. So yeah, I'm just going to comment out home. We won't be needing this. We'll use on root generator. So just so we can get rid of our error. So I'll remove that, and also I'll remove the reference to the file for that sample view file. Okay, so after I've actually created our home view, we need to set up our router. So within our utils, I'm going to create a new file and call it root. ... This is going to be a class that statically references all our routes throughout the app. So anyway we want to move or navigate to a new page, we'll just call routes dot and the name of the route that we want to call. So I'm just going to say static const because I do not want it to change. It's going to return a string or be a string. We'll call it home and we'll assign it the value of that, which is our base. So for those of you who are familiar with web development, that's how you also reference your base. So after your URL, it's everything beyond that is just your first entry point into your app. This will also be what Flutter is expecting its first route to be when running through the route generator. Next, we will actually need a way for us to reference our routes within our route generator. So there's a bunch of ways we can do it. The most common way, as you can see, it's also done by Flutter, is to just use a switch statement, have the actual string come in, and if it matches, return the page. However, I've found that it works, but like I mentioned, it does get a bit bloated. I mean, you can have like 300-400 pages in your app, and imagine that all like in a switch statement. It does get a bit complicated to manage. So my solution to that is to add a map to our routes. So it's pretty much going to be the same as the string value here. It's just going to return, rather than a string, it's going to return a map of functions, and that function should return whatever page we'll be using. So yeah, I think it's a good idea to start with that. It's going to be also static because we want to reference it without creating a version of that class. It's going to be a map that we want to return. So a map, just for those of you who aren't sure, is a key value pair. So we have a key that we actually use to reference the value. It's pretty much the same as how JSON works. Yeah, so we're going to assign the types our map will be using. So the first one will be string. In Flutter, again, you can use pretty much anything. You can have a function as a key and it would return a string. I mean, it could work the exact opposite as what we'll be using, but for our example, we'll use string. So this is where the bit more complicated stuff will happen. Our value won't be a set value. It's going to be a function that returns a widget. And as you know, in Flutter, everything's a widget. Even our views is a stateful widget, so it can return pretty much anything you pass it. So we're going to add, it's going to be a widget function. If I could spell. It's going to be a widget function. I forgot to import material. Quickly hold on. Import material. Alright. Our function will have parameters, which will be a nullable object. This could be object null, and then we'll call it params. This will make a lot more sense right after this. So yeah, let me quickly see what's missing. It's complaining about, let's go map and let's assign it an equals. Alright, so that's our function. Okay, so quick explanation. What we're doing is, so we'll have a string reference to a function that you can pass parameters in, and it should return a widget. So I'm going to add our home page into it. Again, if you're unsure of everything and you have a question, please comment it or just send a message in the chat so I can answer it. It is a bit complicated, but I promise you, as soon as you grasp the concept, it's going to save you so much time in the future. Okay, so let's add our first entry into our map. We need a string as a key, and we're going to use our static member here at the top called home. So that way we know that our home will always reference that. So in the future, if we decide no, we want home to be actually something like this, it will automatically update throughout the app. We don't need to change it anywhere else, only on the one spot. So yeah, we'll use our home key. And now we need to assign our function to it. So we're going to have object, nullable object as the parameters, same as above. And now our actual function needs to return a value. So we're going to use a fat arrow to actually return the widget that this function should return when called. And that's going to be our home view, which should look something like that. Let's quickly check if there's some kind of error. What am I missing? Oh, yeah, obviously. Yeah, so just I'm gonna add another example. It's gonna throw an error, but I just want to show you how the parameters work. In our next video, we will be going into much more detail. But for those of you who want to use this at home or want to try it, just so you understand how it works. So I'm gonna add another object here. Let's call it static const. We'll use string again. We'll call it article page, and we'll assign the value of / article -page to it, just so we can actually have a reference to that. So I can actually show you how that works. So I'm going to give it article page. We need to add our function again. This is going to be standard for each and every one of our entries into our map. Params, and now let's fat arrow into, let's use home view just so we don't have an error. Okay, so the idea behind this, in our article page, which we will be implementing next week, it's going to need parameters passed into it. So what you would do in a situation like this, I'm going to quickly add it to our home view. We can add final string, let's call it value, and then just quick fix this into that. We'll even call it a nullable string, so we don't need to reference it. Alright, so in this situation, just imagine that this is going to be our article page. We can actually assign within home view the value and add our params to it. Remember that this is going to be an object, so this could be a model that you pass through. We just need to say, for instance, as article model, and then reference whatever value we want to assign here, and that's how you can actually pass data from one page to another. But again, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. This will be covered in a bit more detail in our next video. Okay, so let me just remove that and then just continue on, since I got a bit distracted. Yeah, I just saw the message in the chat. There might be a slight issue with the internet as well. I'm not 100% sure what's wrong. If we do dip or go down during the day, I mean, we never know, maybe we might even get load shedding. We will upload the rest of the video by tomorrow afternoon, or even reschedule another stream tomorrow, and then just finish everything up. Okay, so let's continue. So within our root, so we've created a root, we've got a reference to our home view, it assigns our home view in our map. Now we need to actually create our root generator. So I'm going to create another file and call it root builder. It's going to be a class called root builder, so we just know what it does. And again, we're going to have a static function because we don't necessarily want a copy of that class, we just want its members inside. So yeah, I'm going to use static. Before I do this, let's import material again before I forget. Import material, there we go. So our static class will actually return a root object or root widget within Flutter. So this is what Flutter uses to animate between pages. So I'm just going to say root of type dynamic, because it could be any root type. Dynamic, and we're going to call it generate root. It's going to take parameters of root settings, and we'll just call it settings, and that will be that for now. Alright, so like I mentioned, it does return a root, and this is what Flutter uses to animate between pages. It takes root settings. This comes from that material app root generator that I showed you in the app file. That comes with this, and this is where you will actually see your parameters or root names.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, sorry. This is where you actually see your parameters and root names when this is being run. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll actually return a material page root. So for those of you who've used the material page root in the past, you would normally say navigation .of context root or whatever, and then you would create a material page root, and its child or its return will actually be the widget that you want to route to. This is built into Flutter. It does have that and sliding animation as well. what makes this route generator pretty cool is if you have a custom route or route animations that you want to use, you can just change it in one spot, and it updates throughout your app, and it also gives you the ability to use specific routes where you not necessarily want to use this animation, or it's something outside of your app. But yeah, I'm gonna quickly go on. So our builder, just going to add that. For those of you who do not know, if you press, I think it's Control and Space on a Mac or Windows, it does suggest what this builder requires. So I'm just going to use whatever it suggests. It does have a context as a parameter, and now we actually need to return our page that we want to display. So now we will add that routes map that we created on the previous page. We'll use as its key, remember that's the string we'll use to return the function. We'll use our settings that comes from here, and we'll just use name. So if we anywhere throughout the app say we want to route to home, it's going to come in here, it's going to get home from our map, and it's going to return our value for that, which is our widget function. This might be nullable, or Flutter sees it as a possibility of being nullable. It will never be, so we can just add our exclamation mark there. And then as our arguments, we'll add settings dot argument, which will reference our params on the other side of this folder. So I'm going to quickly jump between the two pages so you get an understanding of what's happening. So anywhere throughout Flutter you call navigation.push named, and you pass it a name, it's going to call this function. We're going to run into its builder. It's going to use that name that you've passed in the push named. It's going to look in our map. Where is it? Okay, so we found it here, home. It's going to call this function. So it's going to pass that. It's going to pass the settings arguments into this function, and it's going to return the widget that we've assigned to it. And if in the case we have arguments being passed into the widgets, it's going to do that as well. So yeah, that's pretty much the routing we will be using. The last thing I just need to do is actually assign it to our route generator in the material app. So I'm going to use onGenerateRoute. I'm going to call route builder, and I'm going to click generate route. And then just delete that. So in theory, if everything went well, if I click save, we should see a blank. I think I might just need to rerun this. So in theory, if everything went well, we'll see, yeah, there we go, blank white page. And just for you to be 100% sure we're on the correct page, we'll go back to our home view, and we'll just add an app bar, so you can actually see that there's now been a change to this page. We'll use app bar, we'll click save, and there you can see we're on our home page now. So yeah, that's pretty much our route generator. As I mentioned, we'll be going into a bit more detail next week. We'll actually need to pass data between screens. We'll have a reference and navigation within that. But for now, I think we're happy with where we are now, and we can actually move on to our API, the stuff we'll use for our API connections. So yeah, so for the first thing we'll do is we'll need to import two packages. The one's called do. That's what we'll use as our HTTP package that actually has that gets and header functions within it. So we can just use whatever they've built for us and then just do our own thing on top of that. And then we'll also import RxDart, which does make the streaming of data a bit more simple. For those of you who've used Rx in like web development and so on, it works exactly the same. We also do have a video about state management in Flutter where I explain the Oryx dot and block models in a bit more detail there. It's a pretty cool example where we actually change the color of the app based on the data that's being streamed through. And you're more than welcome to go have a look at that video as well. Alright, so I'm just going to quickly import those two packages. So within Visual Studio Code, you can actually, on Mac it's Command-Shift-B, I think it should be Control-Shift-B on Windows. There's a new thing added recently where you can actually add a dependency from here. So it's just dot, add dependency, and you have access to all pub.dev's dependencies, so there's no longer need to actually go to the website and copy the installation file or installation text and paste that into your pub spec. So yeah, I'm just going to type in dio so we can import that. As you can see, it's being imported here at the bottom. While that's going, I'll go ahead and also add our Rx dot into our, yeah, as you can see, it's adding Rx dot there. And just to show you, within our pub spec file, you can actually see dio has been added, and as soon as this has been complete, you'll see, there we go, Rx has been added, and it's also the newest versions of both. That's automatically been imported into your app. So yeah, just a reminder for if you're using localizations, if you do pub get, it does regress at the moment. Okay, so after our packages has been imported, I'm going to quickly add a new file within our network folder we created last time. So there's a lot of discussion as to what to name this. I prefer to be straight up and just call it API, so I know what I'm working with. It's my API. Within that, I'm just going to create a class. Again, just you can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it API just to keep it simple, so I know what it is I'm actually getting there. So the first thing we actually need to do within our API class is get hold of our API URL. And as you can remember, we've set up in the last video we set up our config where we actually have a way to call our current environment configuration to like API URL. But for in this example, I'm just going to use I'm going to have a getter at the top of my class, so just I can reference the API URL within this class using the same one throughout. So again, I'm just going to use a static I think we should actually use a static string because it's going to be a static string. It's going to be a getter, and we'll make it private and call it API URL, and that's going to return. Oops, that's going to return our config dot API URL. So I just prefer to use it so I don't need to add curly braces throughout my routes. You'll see now. You're more than welcome to just use that when creating a route. But yeah, this is just personal preference. And then also we'll need to actually create a get function within our API. So this will be the actual function that we call that initiates dio and does the API call for us. So I'm just gonna quickly type. It's gonna be a static function again. We don't need to create a version of API each and every time we want to make a call. However, this one is going to be a feature because we are going to use asynchronous programming within it. Its return type, however, is going to be dynamic. Dio does pass the results for us, so we not necessarily know what we're going to return when calling API.get. So the return type is going to be dynamic. We'll call it get, fairly straightforward, and we'll also pass in a root as a parameter, which will be the ending part of our URL we use to get to get to the GET request. So as I mentioned, this is going to be a synchronous function, so we just need to add the async keyword, and that is your function right there. So before we actually add the body of this, we need to quickly just add a reference in our config files to the actual API URL we'll be using. So just a quick reminder, within our assets we added a config folder, and within that we have our three config files. In our main config file we have an API URL, and we also have an environment that we're referencing. So at the moment this API URL is not what we'll be using. We'll be actually using our development config API URL. Because so the environment D overwrites whatever is in that file. So I'm just going to paste in our API URL here. This is a WordPress API, so it does link to our actual WordPress site, and if you make calls to it, you will actually get our article data back. So other than this, there's just one thing I need to change from the previous video. So as you can remember, I actually said that in this example where we have a getter of API URL, I added the version number in as an example for how we can use this. So I'm just going to remove this. We already added the version number in the previous string, and I think it should be fine if we keep it there and then just return our API URL from our config file, which is just to show you again, which is going to be this one. Okay, so now that we have that, I'll quickly go back to our API. So as you know, this is what we'll get. All that the API URL will come here, and then this is what we'll get here. So now we actually need to add our DO API call within it. So I'm going to create a variable and call it res for response. So this will be whatever DO returns to us. This is also an asynchronous function, so we're going to await it so we can actually get the data back. It's going to be DO, so let's create a DO object. It has a get we can use, and then the path is the actual URL path we'll use. And this is going to be a combination between our API URL and our root. So to make it simple, I'm just going to use do it like this. I'm just going to say API URL and then slash root. We just need to remember now that we do not want a trailing forward slash or a leading forward slash between either of these. Otherwise, we're gonna have double forward slashes within that. And then I'm just gonna create have that. So this is pretty much our entire API call, API functionality that we will use. So DO does come with error handling. If you get a 400 or a 404 or a 500 error from your API, DO has a built-in throw that it does. So it's a DO error, and it has all the details within that. So we can be sure that if we get a response, it's going to be the response that we need. So we don't need to add any error handling within our get function. So there might be use cases that you actually want a custom error handling. We have a use case where we have an unauthorized that we actually want to have some functionality happen, a global functionality that happens when we have an unauthorized response in our API. And then what you would do is you would just wrap this in a try catch, and then catch the DO error, and then pass it into whatever one of your custom errors you've written, and then just throw that again and have it in your wherever you want to handle it, wherever you want to handle it. Okay. So yeah, we have our API here, we have our response, and now we can actually return the data that we have received. So we're going to say return response dot data. So again, we know this, if it gets this far, our response will have data, and we can handle our errors wherever we want to, even on our front end, if that's an option for us. Okay, so after this, we should actually create a model that we want to model our data towards. So I've mentioned that DO does parse the data, so this will be this will be whatever your API responds. So it's going to either be a map, which is like JSON, or it's going to be an array of maps. So this is what data might be, and now we actually need a way for our JSON data to be parsed into a model within Flutter, so it's easier for us to implement it and reference our the data within that, rather than having like strings throughout our app. Okay, so the first thing, what we'll do is within models, we'll create a new file. We'll call it article model dot. We'll create a class and call it article model. So yeah, so we have that article model. We can actually just call it article. We don't even need the model part, just to keep it clean. So our article model, based on the data we require at the moment, is just going to need two actual fields, which is going to be title, and we're going to have content. In the future, we might add some more parameters or more fields to it, and we'll adjust it accordingly. But for now, just these two should be fine. So we're going to add final. It's going to be in string format, and it's going to be called title. And next we're going to need final string, and we're going to call it content. Right, so I've set it as final. It's not nullable. We're not expecting title or content to be ever null, and we don't expect it to change. We simply want to get the data and display it somewhere else. Something simple we can do is we can just hover and click quick fix and say create constructor for final fields, and that should generate our article constructor. I do however prefer to have them name parameters. This does have the option of making them nullable, so we just need to add our required keyword. So we can't create this model or a version of this model without assigning the values to these two items. So yeah, there's our article model and our article constructor. The next thing we will do is actually create a way to create an article from a map. Like I mentioned, the data we'll be getting back from our API will be a map, and we need a way to automatically create an article and pass that data into an article. So Flutter does have factory that we can use, which pretty much is it's like having a function that returns the class itself. Just as an example, what we would normally do in a situation like this is have static article and call it let's say build article, and this will, as you can see, return article. But oh no. So Flutter with the factory, you can skip that and just say article dot from map, and this is how you will actually call this. So anytime you type article from map and you pass it a map, it should call this function and it will return an article from that. Yeah, so as our parameters, what we will need, as I mentioned, it is already parsed, so we will have a JSON format map coming in, so which means it's a map with string and dynamic, because we will never know what the value will be. We can try, if we know it's going to be string always, we can accommodate for that, but just to be sure, we're just going to add dynamic. And then, as mentioned, this will return an article. Alright, so yeah, it should return an article like this. So as you can see, our article is currently throwing an error. That's because we have the required keywords, and as I mentioned, you should not be able to actually build an article without filling in these two fields into your object. I just see what I forgot to add to close this. I'll just call it the parameters JSON. So yeah. The first thing we'll do is we'll just then assign the value title a value. We will be using JSON, and as I mentioned, this is a map, so we'll actually need to give it a key to get its actual data back. I'm just going to add content as well, JSON, and that's its key as well. So as you can see, our article has stopped complaining, and in theory, if we pass JSON and we give it a key, it will return whatever value is within this map to title, and then return the actual article model. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly we are using a WordPress API to get the data from our website, and it is structured a bit different than you would normally expect an API structure to be. So as you can see, this is the actual response from our API. We have title as a key, but now so what would normally happen if you have like a custom in-house API that you're using, the string title would be assigned to it and not an object called rendered. So to accommodate for this, we'll add title as our key. So now, if you've been following, title will be this map over here. So we need a way to actually reference rendered within that. So I'm just gonna copy this, and again, so this, remember, this is now a map, so we can actually use a key on this map again. So we're getting title, and then we're getting rendered within our title object, which is this string, which will then be assigned to our article's title. And it's exactly the same for content. So it's going to be content, and then we're going to look within content for rendered again. Yeah, and that is pretty much how you would generate or convert your JSON to an article or a model. But now for our specific use case, our API does return a list of maps. So you can imagine if we even try to pass a list to this function's parameter, it's going to throw an error because the error will be list is not a subtype of map, and it's going to break everything from there. So we need a way to actually accommodate for article or a list of maps that should return a list of articles. Yeah, so apologies for that. Seems like I had some internet difficulties there. So I'm just gonna roll back, do everything from article list or map list. And this is going to be offline, so I'm recording this after the session, and it should be uploaded at the end of our video now. Again, this does complicate questions a bit, so if you have any questions from this part onwards or from the previous section, feel free just to comment it in the video below, and then we will get back to you and actually answer that. So yeah, I'm just going to continue. So the situation we have now is that our API can actually send us a list of articles. and we need a way for that list of JSON objects to be passed into a list of articles. So how we're going to do that is I'm going to create a static function. It's going to return a list of type article. We'll call the function from article from map list. That's the data type we want to convert. Our parameters will be a list of type dynamic. That is how DO sends the data through to us. And then we'll just call it JSON list. Okay. So now we need a way to actually take our list, our JSON list, look through each and every item within it, and convert each and every item into a article. So you might have heard me say each a bit. So what we will be using is a form of a for each loop. Within Flutter, lists does have a map function we can use. So that does take whatever. So it takes your current item in your list and converts it to a new item. So it pretty much maps one item to a new item. So yeah, I think that's perfect for our case. I'm just going to call JSON list.map. So as you can see, the parameter for this function is the item in the current item in the list, and this is what it should be replaced with. Luckily for us, we've already created our article factory, so we can literally just use that to build an article from for each and every item in this list. The JSON should be E, because that's each and every item. We can even, for simplicity, to make it easier to read, we can swap out the JSON, because that is what we were getting back, and put it in there. And then just a last thing, we just need to add to list to specify the format that we want it to return in. Yeah, so that is how we get a list of JSON objects and pass it into a list of articles. Next, we will create a repository. Like I mentioned, repositories is our gateway between our data and our front end, or our business logic. So this is what we'll use to actually get data from our database or API, convert it into a model that we'll actually use within our business logic component, which is our block layer. So yeah, let's call it home view repo, or home view repo.dot. We'll create a class. We'll call it home view repo. So this is just our classes what we use to reference the functions. The function that we'll actually be adding here first is a get article list. So we'll say static. It will return a value. It's going to be asynchronous, so we'll return a value in the future. The value that it will return should be a list of article. The function we'll call get article list, and for now we won't be passing any parameters to it. As mentioned, the function is going to be asynchronous because we will be awaiting our API call. Our API's response, we can create that. We know that the specific call we will be making now is going to be a type list dynamic, so we can just say list dynamic. So list dynamic, we'll call our response, and we'll await our actual call. So this is where we will add a call to that API get we created. So we'll we'll use the API class, we'll use its get function, and now it's expecting a root. Let me just finish up that. So the root would be the specific root, as you remember, that we need for this API call. In our case, it's going to be the following. So I'm just gonna do this and paste in our root there. So as you can see, this will be appended at the end of our API URL. We're looking for posts, we're looking for page one, and we will be looking at how many per page we actually need for the articles. I'm going to keep that as is. Next, we will actually return the data we've just received. So we'll actually use article dot, and as you can remember, that's a list. We'll use from map list, and we'll add response in there. So we'll be getting our data in the form of a list. We'll be mapping that list to a list of articles, and we will be returning it with this function. So a cool thing that's actually in our API is page. So we have pagination built into our API. So we can actually change get article list to have a parameter called page number. That way we can actually from the get-go have pagination. In our case, we do not have more than 10, but we will use this, like for instance, in a list view as soon as we get enough articles on our WordPress site. But yeah, so that's pretty much what you would do. So this will just replace whatever number was in there. We're just going to use page one, but at least we've implemented it now. Okay, so that's our repository. Next, we'll need to add our block file. This will be the actual part that takes our data that we've received here and streams that into our view. So we have a constant update and live data we can work with. As I mentioned, we do have a video explaining this in a bit more detail. So go and watch that. It's a pretty cool example. But again, we'll be using blocks like throughout our app. So by the end of this the series, you should be fairly familiar with it. So just to keep consistent, we'll call it home view block dot. We'll create a class, call it home view block. We'll need a couple of like an import here as well, which should be our Oryx. We can actually let that autocomplete. So yeah, the first thing we'll actually need is a behavior subject, which is the actual. It's like an object we create that we reference our streams and disposes and adds from. So I'm just going to create final. We'll make it private because we don't want to be able to access it any place in our app. We just want to access it within this class. So it's pretty private subject. We'll call behavior subject. This is a function that comes with Oryx dot. So behavior subject. We can actually assign a type to our behavior subject, so we know what specific type is being streamed with our data. And as you know, we'll add list of article. This will be the type of data we'll be using. We do stream a list because we want to update everything as we go along. When we add pagination, it's going to change a bit. We won't be streaming one list at a time. We'll be streaming a global list and just appending new data at the bottom and removing the old data at the top. But that's a bit out of scope from this video, so I'm just gonna we'll leave that for a future video. So yeah, then we need an actual stream object. So this is what we'll reference in our stream builder. Again, it's going to be of type list article. That's the type we will be using. It's going to be in the form of a getter, and we'll call it stream. And then we'll assign the value of subject dot stream to it, so we can actually get this behavior subject's current stream as stream. Next, we'll also need a way to actually update our stream, meaning that if we receive new data, we want a way to be able to insert data into that stream. So again, this is fairly simple. We'll create a function. We'll add a way like parameters to it. The parameters that we want to add into our function is obviously going to be what we want to sync or add into our stream, which would always be the same as these above two items, which is list article. So yeah, and then this will also be a getter function, and we'll make it private because we don't want it to be available outside of our block. We want our update functions to be controlled within, like, in one space. And again, we'll call it update so we know what it does. Update, and this exposes our subject sync, which is what we use to add data. We just need to call add. Again, we don't need any parameters because that's what we get there. Yeah, so that is pretty much our behavior subject. This is pretty much what all our business logic will be built around this. As you'll see, if we have buttons throughout the app, or scrolling, or views, or anything, it will be all managed in pretty much the same way as this. Just an important note: the moment you create a behavior subject, it stays live until you actually call close on it. So just watch out for this. It's a fairly easy way to create a memory leak within your app. So I just like to create a function called dispose with no parameters, and all it does, it closes our behavior subject, as you see. So whenever we assign a value, whenever we call this, it should just close our stream. So yeah, I think this is pretty much everything you will always need within a block. So yeah, then what another thing we can actually add is a function to actually get data from our API and put that into our stream. So I'm going to create a function, call it getData. We will be awaiting, so it should be asynchronous. And then within this, we'll just use our update. And now again, this update function of ours is expecting a list of articles. Luckily for us, we already have a way of converting, of getting data and returning a list of articles with our repository. So we'll just call await home view repo, and within that we'll just get article list for page number 1. And that's it. So as you can see, when we get this, we'll update our article list with a first page, and then that should update our UI accordingly. So something else I like to do a lot, we know that the first thing that we'll do, so whenever we create or reference this block, the first thing that we'll always want to do is to get the data, to have some initial data to work with. So I prefer to create a constructor for our home view block, and then all it does, it calls get data. So that way, the moment that this block is created, it does a call to get the data, and as soon as the data comes back, it should update our stream with the current data in it. So yeah, so this is pretty much everything we'll always do. This is how you get data, but I think it's a good idea to actually have a practical example. So I'll stream my data that we'll be getting from the API into our home view page. So just also note with the internet issue I'm having at the moment that we might have an error thrown that there's no internet connection, but we'll handle that if that happens. So just for the sake of this example, I'm going to use the body, so the body of the scaffold. I will create a stream builder. So the first widget in the scaffold will be a stream builder. As you can see, it generates with a few parameters already filled out. We will not be using initial data. We don't have initial data that we want to use for the stream, so I'll just remove that. The only thing is that our asynchronous snapshot will now have the option, so that its first initial data before any data will be null. So we'll need a way to actually have a null check in here. So what I'll do is I'll have an if statement. I'll use snapshot.hasData. It's a fairly simple check to check if our snapshot has data, do the following. If not, let's use else, do something else with it. I'm going to cut this and paste it within our else statement. So if you have to think what you want, if you are getting data from an API and you have not received your data back, if you have to think about what you want to show, a good thing you can do is just show a loading indicator. So I'm just going to add that into, so we want it to be centered in the screen. So it's going to be center with child of circular progress indicator. Just close that up and end there, and just remember to add the const over there and save. Yeah, so now again, if our snapshot does not have data, we'll show a loading indicator. So now we need to think of something that we want to do if it has data. So we know we're expecting our scaffold to our stream builder to be handling a list of articles. So what we can do is we can just reference list of type article and call it articles, and then assign our snapshot.data to it. So now we know the moment we actually get so if our snapshot has data, we'll create a list of articles and its value should be whatever that data is, because we know we're expecting a list of articles. We then actually need to return a widget that we can display this list onto the screen. So I'm just going to use a list view builder. It's something that comes standard with Flutter. It's, if you want to display data, it's your go-to thing, especially like if it's a list of data. This is your go-to widget. Like I mentioned previously, you can use your shortcut to actually autocomplete your builder function. We'll literally just use context and index, so it returns the current context and the current index of the item in the list. And we just want to display a text widget that's pretty much going to be our article's title. So we want to look for articles at index, so the current item in the list of the list view builder, and then after which we're going to say we want its title. Fairly simple. Just need to remember that with a list view builder, it does require you to add a item count, just so it knows how much to build and where to stop. So I'm just going to use item count, and this is going to be equal to articles.length. So we're going to use our item count. It's going to be exactly the same as our amount of articles, and then we want to build a list of articles titles and have them displayed in the screen on the side. Okay, so now how do we actually get data into our snapshot? Because if I run the app now, we're only going to see a loading indicator. So that's where our block comes in. So at the very top of our widget, we can actually call final, because we don't want it to change. we'll call homepage block. We'll make it private because we don't want to access it outside of our class. And then we'll add the value of homepage block to it. And as you remember, the moment we do this, we create this class, it automatically goes and fetches our data for us. So there's no other steps needed to actually make an API call. We then, however, just need to assign that stream we created in our block to our stream builder, so we know that the data that's being streamed from our block is the same data that's being built within our stream builder. And then also, very importantly, is to actually dispose of your block. So all stateful widgets has a dispose override. This is called when your actual widget is destroyed. So for instance, if we move from this screen, we remove it from our screen stack, dispose will be called, and so it's a good place to actually destroy our stream that we've created as well. Just to make sure that it's not running in the background and causing a memory leak. So yeah, block.dispose, and that should be that. So again, if everything went well, the moment that I refresh our app, we'll actually see a loading indicator, and then shortly after we will have data populated into our view. As you can see, loading indicator. If everything goes well, we should see data very soon, unless this is broken. 404. Okay, so it seems like I've messed something up in the root. Let's quickly see if I can actually see within our error what the issue might be. Let's see if I actually made the mistake that I didn't want. It's a post page per page. Let's quickly roll back to our API. API URL root. Let's just add a print statement here so we can actually see, like, print out our current, like the root word that we will be using to actually do an API call. Let's have that saved. Let's rerun the app. There's the API call. Oh, as you can see, that version number I referenced a bit earlier is still in our config file. Let's quickly see if I can remove that. Oh, so yeah, no, it's still here. What the hell? Let's save this. Oh, failed to say the content in the file is newer. Let's roll back and just try again. I don't know what's up with let's save that. The content in the file is newer. Please compare your version. This is something else. Let's save again and just force an overwrite. And there we go. So we can just remove this as well. Just roll back. And then that one as well. If I save now, performance save, I'll reload complete. So in theory, if I rerun now, we'll actually get some data back. And there, it does API call, and there we can actually see our data. And that's the articles we actually have on our WordPress site at the moment. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for our video today. Again, apologies for the internet going out, and if you're watching this after the stream, hopefully there wasn't, like, you weren't too inconvenienced with that. But yeah, so that's pretty much how you get API data. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. And then yeah, we'll see you in our next episode, where we will actually start designing a view to display our articles, like a list of article screens. But yeah, alright, anyways, see you next week.